Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest reports on these skills training programmes that have been cut in the UK as a result of Brexit. It's absolute madness because Brexit should be motivating us to put more effort into domestic skills development. This is not unlike losing your driving licence and then deciding to tear up your bus pass while you're at it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, back in the very early days of me talking about Brexit on the internet, I tried really hard to find any potential silver linings because I was very conscious at the time. It's like, look, downside, 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 downside. For balance, you want to try and find some upsides because the net effect is that Brexit is bad. But, what are the good sides? It's almost like if I can only come up with downsides, I'm being a bit blinkered. So with my background in education, the obvious one I thought, well, it was skills training, maybe. Put simply, we do have a lot of skilled people in the UK across some industries, yeah, but we could do so much more. There's plenty of other industries for which we're falling quite hard behind. We're a little bit like the Premier League in many ways. We import skills rather than focusing on developing our own, especially under the Conservatives. It's like the government failed to understand you can actually do both, You can actually invest in developing skills in your domestic workforce and then import whatever other skills you need for top up. The problem is that we're now doing neither of these things. Like, imagine how football in England would suddenly look if we not only made it impossible to recruit the best talent from around the world, but still refused to put any serious effort into developing domestic talent. This is what Brexit Britain is. By leaving the single market, we lost ready access to a highly skilled workforce. Wasn't an essential part of leaving the single market. We could have adapted our immigration system to manage. In some ways, you could argue it does for well-paid workers. Like, if you are a non-British or Irish citizen, you can still get a job in the UK, no problem at all should you wish to, as long as it's well paid. The problem is that our economy is buggered. There are lots and lots of skilled jobs that are not that well paid, and so they fall foul of our immigration points system. So we've lost access to skilled workers from abroad, which is ruinous for a lot of sectors of our economy. Really bad for engineering, where we already had a desperate shortage as it was. Bad for healthcare, where we already had a desperate shortage as it was. It's bad for financial services, where we didn't have a desperate shortage, but now we do, because we've been losing workers to other centres in Europe. Frankly, what we needed was a massive push to get people trained up in these shortage areas. We needed a huge injection of funding into education and training. If you really want to level up the country, you have to start from the ground up. Let's face facts, we've made it really hard to trade with the world now. We have initiated a hard Brexit that has raised huge trade barriers with the EU. Now, we haven't specifically raised trade barriers higher with countries in other parts of the world, but the rising cost of transport is an indirect raising trade barrier as well. So from whatever source, it is now harder to export to countries, whether near or far. That is the reality for us. And that reality is not going to change while we carry on our current path, which means for several years, it's not going to change. So our only hope for economic growth is to provide products that you cannot get elsewhere. People aren't going to pay more money for products from the UK if they can get the same or better quality from either their own market or an equivalent market. So we need to innovate. Indeed, the government likes to use the word innovate a lot. But that needs a highly skilled workforce. It's all right coming up with a brilliant idea. If you don't have the skills in the workforce to be able to make it reality, you're having to take that idea abroad, aren't you? So it means we need to take education seriously. We need an education system that empowers kids in all parts of the country to keep their options open when they leave school. Then we need to make sure that colleges and universities are able to offer the specialised training programmes that can turn innovation into a thriving industry. And we need to make sure it's properly funded so people from all backgrounds can get into it. To maximise our talent pool. It isn't hard. If you do not have the skilled workers to drive these industries, and you cannot import those skills from overseas from countries that do, then you will lose out every single time. It's not a credible plan to simply manufacture what can be manufactured elsewhere in the world, because such goods will rarely be competitively priced when made in Britain. Our trade deals don't allow us to compete with the domestic producers of our trade partners anymore. So yes, I thought one possible benefit might be a massive increase in training programs driven by necessity. No longer political ideology, sheer necessity would drive it. Now, my hopes were not high because we had a Conservative government, but it remained a potential silver lining. But no. I now read, surprise, surprise, that the government, far from increasing funding for training programmes to close our skills gap, are actually pulling funding from programmes that existed as EU members. So our solution to missing out on lots of skilled workers is to deprive ourselves of even more skilled workers. Like, you couldn't make it up. And it's all related to the levelling up funds that I've talked about before and will no doubt talk about again. Tory promises of money that will replace the EU funding for various projects and be used to level up the country. But it is conspicuous by its absence. And projects are already being pulled. This isn't like people worried that the funding might not be there because the government are still being very quiet on it. It isn't there and it's needed now, and that's all there is to it. In this case, we're talking about training programmes across the country, and they're being stopped now. You know, they were funded by the EU, but the UK is not continuing the funding. And like I say, it needed not only to fund those programmes, but many more as well. We were using those programmes to develop skills, whilst we also had access to skilled workers from overseas. I cannot say this enough. Now that we have massively reduced the number of skilled foreign workers we've got access to, it is an absolute imperative to develop these skills domestically. And like I also said before, we always could. We always could have had the attitude of raising skills amongst the domestic workforce in the EU and just topping them up with foreign labour, as some other EU countries do. We had this system under the last Labour government. I worked in adult education for a bit. Lifelong learning was a big feature. A lot of it very quickly ended when the Tories came to power. And the article I was reading said that a think tank was concerned that with 1 million fewer people in the labour market compared with pre-COVID, oh yeah, I know the government say it's back up to pre-COVID levels. It's not. 1 million fewer in the workplace, and it will be the less well-off areas that will be hit the hardest by this policy. And this is absolutely one of the reasons why people said those less well-off areas who voted for Brexit were voted to make their lives much worse. It was actually the cruelest aspect of Brexit, really. The Conservatives beat them down with austerity, then got them thinking, well, things can't get any worse, can they? So even if Brexit arguments didn't work on everyone, they worked on some, but there'll be other people who go, I'm not really buying that. But it's like, but what's the harm? Some thought it was worth a punt because it's not like things could get worse for them. Not only could they get worse, they are getting worse, and they will get worse still. The proverbial turkey's voting for Christmas. And this think tank, New Philanthropy Capital they're called, said that it risked undermining the government's levelling up ambitions. I think, frankly, should be now crystal clear that the government don't have levelling up ambitions. They made specific promises related to their levelling up programme for which funding has now been removed. What funding has been allocated has only been allocated to a few Tory areas, and even then only those thought to be key marginals at the next election. Most of the money that was promised remains just that, money that was promised. Over 2 years since the general election, there's still no sign of either the money or a statement on where it will be going when it eventually turns up, because we know where it'll all be going. It'll all be going, even in the areas where it is allocated to Tories. It'll be like the VIP lane again. But it is quite correct to say that those less well-off areas will be hardest hit. It's all very well Conservatives saying the way out of poverty is to work, but not only do these areas not have many decent jobs around, but failing to build up skills will not help that situation. Why would you build a new industry in a town without the skills to drive it? Of course not. Why build a business in an area where you don't have access to suitable workers? You wouldn't. So although a post-Brexit government could have looked at our widening skills shortages and decide, well, training's the obvious answer here, we need to train up our own workforce, this is not what's happened. And the reason is that our government is not rational, nor does it act in the national interest. If it was either, it would not have ushered in Brexit at all, because that's what we have. We've got a government that knew the damage Brexit would do to the country, and not only did it anyway, but did it in the harshest terms they thought they could get away with. It's not a government that will make the decisions in the national interest. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.